All right, let's keep going. All right, just, I know it's a lot of information. Just read it. If you have a question, we can discuss. I know it's kind of a lot of information, but it's not that complex. But if you still have questions, we can talk about it a little more later on. Okay. Now let's talk about the glycogen breakdown and synthesis. So as you see, glycogen, again, is a reserve. It's occur after you have a nice meal, and you have excess. Now you want to store the excess of glucose, okay? So one thing you have to remember, it is found mainly in the liver, as you said, and the kidneys, but in the muscle, because the muscle storage for its own purpose, not for anybody else. Now, it's composed of the, structure look this way, glucose molecule attached, and it's like a branch, just basically like a tree. So the glucose molecules are linked by 1,4 glucosidic bond, and this is important because specific enzymes recognize specific linkage. And you also have a branch, the 1,6 length, which is a glucosidic length, which is basically like the branch point. You find those on those green area, the branch point, okay? So the branch occurs every 8 to 10 glucosyl units and so forth. And we're going to talk about that. So now this is your 1,4 language, and this is the 1,6 language, okay? If you recall, we already said that in the... So now you have three major storage. The liver, skeletal, again for itself, but the kidney represents a smaller one. But kidney become much more important in the prolonged starvation. The kidney then does in the gluconeogenesis. But the kidney also represents a small glucogen storage, okay? Because it take it, make it, and then later on release it. Okay? So the major storage is in the liver and the muscle. So it turns out, if you look at it in the muscle, the glycogen is there, get released, the glucose 6-phosphate remain in the muscle and then go through glycolysis for utilization for energy. In the liver, just in the kidneys, the glycogen breakdown occur and the glucose is later on released to maintain the blood glucose. Okay, is that clear? And we're going to talk about each one of these sections a little more in detail. So you remember this. So now it turns out after you eat, basically you have a lot of glucose around and it starts getting utilized quickly. By 4 hours, you start getting low, and the glucose that you got from food you ate earlier. And glycogen breakdown take place at that point. And that take on until your gluconeogenesis reaches a certain point. But very quick, your glycogen level kept. So that's why when you're in a starvation, you ran out your glycogen very quick within 24 hours. Okay? So basically, the glycogen breakdown, it's a bridge between the food stuff, the glucose from your food stuff, and the gluconeogenesis. So it's like a bridge between the two, as you can see. It's a bridge between gluconeogenesis and the glucose utilization for the food stuff. So now you have the glucose here, as you recall. You should know the structure of the glucose by now. Now you have your glycosidic linkage and you have your branch, if you recall. So those two branches are very, very important because in order to release glucose from the tail, you need one enzyme, but in order to release from the branch, you need another enzyme that we're going to talk about. Okay? So the tail ones, it's a 1,4 linkage, and the branches are 1,6 linkage. Okay? All right, the breakdown. So when you have your glycogen and you have not eaten for 4 hours, turns out you stimulate an enzyme called glycogen phosphorylase. And what it does is come and cleave the glycogen at the tail, and it releases as a glucose 1-phosphate. So the phosphorylase, inorganic phosphate is attached at the carbon number 1. Okay? So you start with the 4 glucose, you end up with the 3. Now we have 1 glucose that is phosphorylate at position 1 that is now free. Okay? So once this is released, what is the target of this molecule? Where does it go? Where does it go? It gets mutated, right? There is an enzyme called phosphoglucomutase. You take the glucose 1 phosphate and you mutate it to glucose 6 phosphate. This can occur in the liver, but it can also occur in the muscle. What happened to the glucose 6 phosphate in the muscle? It get clipped off? No, it doesn't get clipped off, right? It remains in the muscle and it goes through glycolysis, right? You remember I said that? Now the glucose 6 phosphate in the liver get acted on by an enzyme called the glucose 6 phosphatase. Now the free glucose, this enzyme clips the phosphate off. Now the phosphate is free, and the free glucose now leaves the liver cells and is released outside. So, and that is important. As I said, anytime molecules are phosphorylated, they stay in the cell. When they get dephosphorylated, in the case of glucose, then they are free to go through the outside of the cells and release outside. This is how the blood glucose is maintained utilizing glycogen. Okay. Now, the removal of the branch. So what happened, the phosphorylase keep going all the time, removing until you reach a certain point. Now you reach what's called the branch. Okay? As you see here, the glycogen phosphorylate, this tail, it takes the glucose off, it takes this one, up to you reach the green one, about 4 glucose from the branch point. You also take this one and you remove it until 4 branches to the branch point. Now the glycogen phosphorylate can no longer work beyond that point. Is everybody seeing that? The glucose are removed all up to these about 4 molecules before the branch point, and also same way. So once you reach that point where you have 4 here, you have 4. Now this enzyme, glycogen phosphorylate, cannot work beyond that point. Okay? Now there is another enzyme that comes and play the game at that point. And that enzyme is a bifunctional. Bifunctional, again, because people ask me this question. When I say bifunctional, it's like one giant protein, 2 domain. One domain does a function, other domain does another function. That's what we call bifunctional. Okay? So what happened, it has a transferase activity. What transferase that is to pick up the glucose, the 3 glucose here, and put it behind this guy that is behind here. So you have a long chain now. Everybody see that? You pick up the 3 glucose and attach behind here. Okay? That is a function of the 4. And then there is another name for this, people, different name. Let me bring it out. Maybe I can, so you can see it. So it is also called the 1,4 or alpha 1,4 transfer, glucan transferase. So if you see this name, I want you to know what they're talking about, okay? Because different books give different names. The transferase 4 transferase is the same thing as the alpha 1,4 alpha 1,4 glucan transferase, okay? Also known as a 4,4 transferase. All right? All right, let's go back to the graph. So once that transferase take the 3 and put it behind here, you see there is a one single glucose molecule that is linked to this glucose through what type of linkage? 1,6 linkage, okay? So he cannot do anything about how 1,6 linkage, so he has to lead up to another enzyme that is specialized removing that. And that is called the alpha 1,6 glycosidase enzyme, which job is to remove the 1,6 linkage and free that glucose. Is that clear? All right. So now the phosphorylase now has a longer tail, the glycogen phosphorylase, now come and cleave off the remaining until you reach another 4 glucose molecule from the branch. And again, the transferase will come and does the job, and then we keep going. Is that clear? Good. So that's the degradation. Now, there are some diseases, because this, even though there are a few enzymes in it, but it's a lot of disease involved with it. So I think I should bring it up quickly after I talk about the degradation, so we can clear those out and then move on. So the von Willebrand disease, you already know this guy, right? We'll talk about that a lot. So basically, the phosphatase is deficient due to a mutation. Okay, and there's a lot of stuff associated with that. You can read it. Okay, so if you don't have that, then the patients can be in hypoglycemia. So when he's hungry, he cannot maintain his blood glucose because the glucose is trapped, and it can lead to liver damage and also kidney damage. Okay. Now the next one is the glycogen storage disease type 2. So the von Willebrand disease is a type 1, and this one now is the type 2. Okay. So it turns out about 1 to 3% of glycogen are degraded in the lysosomes. Okay. Nobody knows for sure what is the function of that, but in fact it occurs about 3 or 4%. 1 to 3% of glycogen are degraded in the lysosome. And there is a specific enzyme there called the 1,4-glycosidase, okay? And sometimes they call it a lysosomal alpha-1,4-glycosidase enzyme. So what that enzyme does is just like a phosphatase, is remove, just like the phosphorylase, it removes the glucose from the tail, okay? Now, some patients, for some reason, children born with a deficiency in this enzyme, that can lead to serious issue, okay? So it is called the Pombe disease. It affects 1 to 40 infants. So basically, it's characterized by accumulation, glycogen, not, partially degraded glycogen in the lysosome, okay? So that can lead to myopathy, muscle damage, cardiomyopathy, and sometimes, children who have this disorder, if they're not treated on time, they may die by the age of 2. So it is a horrible disease. I think it's tested when the children are born to see if they have a deficiency in this. So for therapy, you can give the infant IV. Everybody know what I mean, IV, right? IV, intravenous enzymes, basically genetically modified enzymes, basically enzyme to be released in the patient's blood, so to help the patient. It's called the enzyme is called the glucosidase alpha. Basically, it has the same activity as this guy, the alpha-4-glucosidase. So once you give that, so it helps the patient to neutralize the glycogen that is now being degraded. So basically, help the enzyme. So it's good to give the patient also high protein diet, okay, to reduce the muscle loss, okay, because the muscles start dying, trying to, compensate it. So if you give the high protein, it can reduce the muscle damage, okay. So this is the Pombe disease, and it's a very important, as I said, about 1 in 40,000 infants are affected by this disorder. Now, the next one is the debranching enzyme. So the glycogen storage disease type 3. If you recall, we have those branch formations, debranching enzymes, these two, okay? So now, this is called the Curie disease or Forbes disease, affecting skeletal muscle, okay? If you deficient on this enzyme, so basically the phosphorylase come to remove the glycogen all the way to the branch. So when you reach the branch, those glucose molecule in the branch cannot be removed, and that can lead to a muscle damage. And even the cardiac muscle damage occur. You have a cardiomyopathy or cardiomyopathy. The patient has a sufficient issue with the heart, and also skeletal muscle damage occur, but and that it can lead to heart failure and then liver failure and so forth. Usually the patient has a difficulty. Anytime you cannot release glycogen, you have a difficulty to get the glucose quickly, especially in the muscles, so the person have difficulty exercising and so forth. Okay? So it turns out, the patient has to avoid hypoglycemia. Okay? So now sometimes when you do routine exercise, just moderate exercise, that can help you because your body will try to adjust all the time. But if you suddenly get up one day and try to exercise, intense exercise, then you're really in trouble because at that point you run out of glucose coming out from the glycogen, and you're reaching branches everywhere, and the branches cannot be removed, so you cannot release your glucose that way, and that can lead to a lot of issues. Okay. So eat and drink before exercise, so you're supplying glucose, so you don't have to dig into a glycogen storage. So you eat and drink, then that will supply your blood glucose during your exercise, and so forth. Okay. Is that clear? So you have these enzymes, the glucose, again, the glucan transferase deficiency. Now, the other one is this McCullough disease, which is a type 5. And this occurs because there is a specific enzyme, the glycogen phosphorylase. The the very same glycogen phosphorylase that remove glucose from the 1,4 positions all the way to the branch. And this particular one is the glycogen phosphorylase in your muscle, okay? So if it's deficient, they call it skeletal muscle glycogen phosphorylase. If this is deficient, as you see, this guy is screaming, he has excruciating pain due to the deficiency, and then the person starts running out of the energy, and then reaching the glucose is not getting released. So this is the reactions catalyzed by the glycogen phosphorylase. You've seen that before. So basically, the phosphorylase will remove the glucose and make it available to the muscle, because the mucase will take this and convert the glucose 6-phosphate, and it's available right away. So if you have a deficiency on the enzyme, the person tends to have cramps, fatigue, even a pain on the muscle and when they exercise. Okay? And it can cause muscle damage. So when muscles start running out of energy, so they will start dying, and the myoglobin start getting released in the blood. Sometimes they measure the myoglobin level in the blood or in the urine because it's getting released, muscle dying, and they get released in the blood, and they find itself in the urine, and they can measure that as a diagnostic, part of the diagnostic for the McCullough disease. Okay, so basically avoid hypoglycemia. So anytime somebody has this disorder, the best thing is to avoid them to try to dig into glycogen storage. So you supply glucose when they exercise and doing things. So the blood glucose is nice and high, so they can access it right away to do the exercise. They don't have to go digging into the glycogen storage. The problem started, the symptoms started when you start digging into the glycogen storage. Is that clear? All right. That's the fun part. I hope I'm not making you hungry. All right, so now what we were discussing, it was the glycogen degradation. Now we're going to talk about glycogen storage, all right? You're synthesizing and you're storing it, all right? So it occurs when you have a large carbohydrate meal, right? Maybe we have another 2 hours to go before your meal. So once you start eating, your blood glucose starts shooting up because you eat a lot of carbohydrate, so that can stimulate glycogen synthesis at that point. Is that clear? All right. So basically, glycogen is a polymer of glucose, as we mentioned earlier. So the synthesis occurs from alpha-D glucose, okay? And I hope everybody knows now the difference between alpha and beta glucose. Yes or no? Carbon number 1, the anomeric carbon, is down alpha, up is beta, right? So know that. And the D, that's the stereo, polarized, basically they polarized like to the right, to the left. To the right, that would be D, to the left, that's L. But you don't need to know all that. But I'm sure you've already seen all that in chemistry, right? The D and the L. Okay, good. All right. So basically, it requires energy. So the synthesis, anytime synthesis occurs, in many cases, it requires energy, okay? But ATPs require, UTP also require. So it started from glucose, alpha-D glucose. All right. Here is the pathway. Again, pathway, but this is very simple, okay? So the whole thing started when you have a glucose 6-phosphate. Where did glucose 6-phosphate come from? Everything is linked, right? Where does glucose 6-phosphate come from? In your liver. What is the enzyme that catalyzes that reaction? Glucose 6-phosphate. Oh, come on. That's the enzyme you know. All of you know it. The glucokinase. How about in the muscle? Exokinase, right? So those two enzymes, I know everybody knows those enzymes now. So the glucose, once the glucose gets to the, your blood glucose start going up after you eat. So the glucose reaches a certain level, the glucokinase Km is now reached. So the glucose is phosphorylated to glucose 6-phosphate in your liver. In the kidneys, phosphorylated by glucokinase. Okay? In the muscle, now it's the exokinase. Now you generate a lot of glucose 6-phosphate, they keep coming, get trapped inside. Now they have to go somewhere, right? Now they get utilized to synthesize glycogen so they can be stored. Now the glucose 6-phosphate is converted to glucose 1-phosphate by the phosphoglucomutase. Okay, now you have a glucose 1-phosphate that is formed. That glucose 1-phosphate is now passed on to UTP, and you have your UDP glucose. So you see the 1-phosphate, now you attach it to this UTP. 1-phosphate is low, the 2-phosphate is low, but you already have 1-phosphate there, so you find yourself the UDP, okay? From a uracil triphosphate, now you have uracil diphosphate, and now you have a glucose attached to it, okay? So that complex is called the UDP, UDP glucose, catalyzed by the enzyme called glucose pyrophosphorylase, okay? Is this clear? Now, after this point, there are two things that occur. If you are completely depleted in glycogen, now the attachment has to occur in a protein. But if you already have some glucogens around and the branch is open, so you can polymerize from that glycogen as a primer. Okay? What I'm going to talk about here, you completely depleted out of glucogen, so now the new synthesis has to occur. Since the enzyme cannot pick up one glucose and attach the UDP glucose to it, so it has to start it from the primer. Everybody know what I mean, the primer, right? So the glucogenide proteins is present in your cells. So represent the OH group and the tyrosine group, represent the primer. So basically that's the binding site, the attachment site, or the incoming glucose, okay? So now it's the first glucose come and get attached, the second come and get attached, and the reaction is catalyzed by enzyme called glycogen synthase enzyme. All right? This enzyme is very important. We're going to talk about regulation, so keep in mind from here. So at that point, you have glucose molecule get attached all along, okay? Now, when it reaches a certain level, now glucose, the branches has to occur. Now, there is a specific enzyme that is associated with the branching, okay? And as you see here, this is enzyme, okay? Now, you have a long chain. You need to create a branch now, the branch that is here. The enzyme called the 4,6 transferase, okay, now attach the branch, okay? So the branches occur. So when that occurs, now the molecule, this keep extended by the action of glycogen synthase. Is that clear? Just 2 or 3 enzymes, but it's not as complicated as the PFK2. Is this clear? All right. So now, if you have a deficiency on the 4,6 transferase, then that can lead to another glycogen storage disease now here called the glycogen storage type 6. Okay. So this is the only one associated, as far as we're concerned, associated with the synthesis. The rest of them, glycogen storage disease, are associated with the degradation. Okay, keep that in mind. All right? I have a summary slide at the end where I highlight this thing in red, so keep that in mind. Okay. So when there's this enzyme deficiency, you cannot make a branch, and that can lead to issue. So now you have more attachment and so forth until you have a full glycogen storage. And again, the glycogen storage gets full very quick, okay? The liver gets saturated, kidney gets saturated. So now the glucose, when you still have the glucose in the body because you like to eat every hour, now the glucose has to go somewhere. Where does it go? Well, energy has to be stored in what form? You always have to connect biochem. Your glycogen storage now full. What you need to do with the rest of the glucose? Huh? You utilize for fat synthesis, okay? So keep that in mind, and we're going to talk about that when we talk about fat synthesis. So when the glycogen storage is full, and the person, you know this, right? If somebody always eat every hour, always eat, so the blood glucose is always high, your body will say, okay, I have to do something with this guy. I need to start storage for him. So now the glycogen storage full, now you convert the glucose now all the way to pyruvate, to acetyl-CoA, and now ship that out to synthesize fatty acid, and that will be storage, and the person find himself 2-3 months later on a little chubby, okay, because you eat too much. All right? It's as simple as that. So the regulation is very simple. First, think about what should happen to glycogen under different conditions. Now, you are sitting here for 2 hours, right? And you ate your breakfast like 5 hours ago. Let's assume that way. What's going on now? Are you making glycogen? Or are you breaking it? 5 hours. You're breaking it, right? If you eat a snack like some just did, what they're doing? Synthesize, right? Insulin goes up, yes. All right, so let's work it out. So insulin and glucagon, which one is up? Glucagon is up if you're starving. When you eat, blood glucose start rising, insulin go up. Good. All right. So now put yourself in a fast and fed state. So you must always consider 5 hours. The glycogen breakdown should, be stimulated. Now the synthesis is downregulated. Now you have a nice crispy donut. All right? So that will help you to stimulate glycogen synthesis. So the breakdown will shut down, so you have to start synthesizing glycogen, okay? So the synthesis is not active. It's as simple as that. When you have food around, synthesize to storage them. If you low in energy, you break it down. It's as simple as that. So always put yourself in the fed on starvation condition in order to answer these questions. So how does it work? Okay, back again to the pKa. But again, very simple. As I said, when you want to study this cascade, when you're on the high, you're starving 5 hours from now on, what you do, the glycogen synthesis is inhibited, right? Because 5 hours later on, you're not synthesizing glycogen after you eat, so you stop synthesis. So at that point, what happened, the fact that your blood glucose starts getting low, glucagon level goes up, and you start getting a little nervous, upset, you don't want to be here. So epinephrine level goes up, right? So all those enzymes bind to the receptor and activate specific kinds. But one thing you have to remember, when the glucagon is up, epinephrine is up, glycogen synthesis is down. That's what you have to remember first, if you can link these two. When the epinephrine and glucagon is up, the glycogen synthesis is downregulated, which makes sense, right? You guys just answer that. You have not been eating, glucagon goes up, you shut down glycogen synthesis. Now, what you stimulate? Glycogen breakdown, right? Yes or no? All right. So here is the cascade. So the pKa is activated by cyclic AMP. Adenylyl cyclase generate cyclic AMP. Once the pKa is activated, what the pKa does, it takes the glucogen phosphorylate synthesis that was active and phosphorylated. So once the glucogen synthesis is phosphorylated, it becomes inactive. Okay, one thing you have to remember, phosphorylation and dephosphorylation can lead the reaction one way or the other. And so don't put in your mind that when some enzyme is phosphorylated, is it directly inactivated. Not always. Sometimes phosphorylase activates some enzyme and inactivates some enzyme. So, okay, so I can't give you a general rule for that, but that's the reality. Is that clear? But in this particular case, the glucogen synthase, when it's phosphorylated, it becomes inactive, okay? So it gets phosphorylated by the PKA, the protein kinase A, phosphorylated glucogen synthase. So when it phosphorylates, it becomes inactive. You see the phosphorylate attack, it becomes inactive, okay? So glucogen synthesis will not take place anymore. Now, when you eat, what happened to your insulin level? Shoot up, right? So the insulin will come very nicely, activate a protein called protein phosphatase. The phosphatase said, I'm in charge now. So he can, because I have a lot of glucose on board, you have to start synthesizing glucogen, right? So he come and take the phosphate off and free this guy, this poor guy. Now it's free, it becomes active, and he start taking glucose and synthesizing glucogen. Is that clear? Good. So the insulin and glucagon, so they work in a concert, between welfare and starvation condition. Is that clear? Okay. All right. So now the glucogen breakdown. So now you shut down the synthesis. Inhibition of the synthase, you shut down the synthesis. Now what you're gonna do is what? You're gonna break it down, right? So which enzyme would you activate when you're gonna break down glucogen? Because you need energy. Enzyme to break down is called the phosphorylase, if you remember. The phosphorylase. All right. So again, you still on the 5 hours and you're starving, you're hungry, epinephrine is up and glucagon is up, right? So PKA is still active. Remember the same. But what you have to remember here, there is an enzyme called phosphorylase. Okay? I'm not talking about any of these yet, but put that in your mind. Which enzyme should be activated in order for the glycogen to be broken down? The phosphorylase, if you remember from a few slides back, the phosphorylase has to be active in order to create glycogens, okay, and release the glucose. So now, once the epinephrine bind and glucagon bind, glucogen phosphorylase active. That's what you have to keep to put down first. Once you get that, then the rest is just to lead to this point. Okay? Are you following me? So should we take the step now to get this guy phosphorylated? Are you ready? All right. Let's move on. So it turns out, in order to be phosphorylated, there is an enzyme called glucogen phosphorylase kinase. This enzyme is not active. As far as we're concerned, it is active when it gets phosphorylated by PKA. So once this enzyme is active, the glucogen phosphorylase kinase A is now active. So this active form then takes the glucogen phosphorylase B that was inactive, phosphorylate and become the active form of a glucogen phosphorylase called the glucogen phosphorylase A. Is that clear? The kinase, the glucogen phosphorylase kinase, is activated by the protein kinase A. Okay? So when you're done, you want to shut down the cascade, what would you do? The glucogen phosphorylase kinase has to be inactivated. And that's when the insulin comes. In what condition the insulin comes? When you are well fed, right? So once the insulin comes, it will activate the protein phosphatase, and that protein phosphatase can dephosphorylate the protein, glycogen phosphorylase kinase, and inactivate it by dephosphorylation, then it becomes inactive. When that occurs, this guy can no longer phosphorylate glucogen phosphorylase. Okay? So now the glucogen phosphorylated, even though the kinase is there to phosphorylate, it still remains phosphorylated until the insulin comes again and tell them, now it's time, it's your time. The phosphatase that is inactivated by insulin now also dephosphorylate this guy, and he becomes inactive. So you shut down the cascade. Is that clear? And the activation is associated with the glucagon, and the inactivation is associated with insulin, right? So you see now how insulin and glucagon work in concert? Okay? So now if the person is well fed, the glucagon is no longer there, epinephrine is there, now the insulin is there, now it does the job. So everything else, at least the breakdown is shut down. Is that clear? Is this clear? All right. I know it's a lot of information. Now, I summarize it in a few slides here, and a few things here. That will give you a good starting point, right? So you have your glucagon, epinephrine, protein kinase 8, phosphorylated glucogen synthase, and inactivating. Now the protein phosphatase inhibitor is now active. Then at that point, the phosphorylase kinase, which is then activated, can phosphorylate the phosphorylase, and the phosphorylase become active. That can simulate the glucogenolysis, basically break down the glucogen. Okay, so everything I said on the earlier two slides summarized here. So this is a good starting point for you. Okay. All right. So this gives you a little summary of the diseases. So glycogen storage disease, the type 1, that's your von Willebrand disease here. The Pombe associated glucosidase are also known as the acid maltase. The type 3 associated with the transferase. Now the type 6, if you recall, it's a 4-6 transferase, and that is the branching enzyme that play a role in the what? In the synthesis. And I put that in red because the others are associated with the degradation, but this is the only one associated with the synthesis. Okay. Now I have a summary slide here for you, which really summarizes everything I said, at least on the glycogen, the metabolism, which just can give you a perspective, and you can go through this. It's very simple. Basically, summarize everything I said earlier in the previous slides. All right. So this was a short one. So any questions? All right. If you don't have any question, thank you. I'll be here until 10 minutes or so. If you have questions, just come on over and we'll clear it up. All right. Thank you.